Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. Today's guests are, I guess the best way I can describe them, are troublemakers in the most constructive way. Oskar and Chris are disruptors, they're pioneers in the e-commerce space. And often, and I say this as a compliment, as you guys know, square pegs in round holes. And because of that, they're forcing organizations to confront reality broadly, but in particularly in the e-commerce space. So Oskar and Chris are co-founders of firstmovr, an e-commerce accelerator focused on, as I understand, and we'll talk about this in a while, demystifying, training, and enabling e-commerce practitioners. Quick background, and we won't go deep into this, but Oskar led e-commerce at a number of blue chip companies, of which we work together: Kellogg's, Mondelez, Kimberly-Clark, and a few others. And Chris also at Kellogg's, but also you had a long stinted record and a whole bunch of others. So suffice it to say, you got two guys here who are change agents and have seen a number of different facets of the e-commerce world, and they've parlayed this into this company called firstmovr. So first of all, welcome, guys. I appreciate you taking time to spend with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It's always good. Generally, bad things happen when we get together. Let's hope it happens again today. So let's start at the end, or the beginning, or the end. Firstmovr, you co-founded this. If I remember correctly, you're almost 3 years, about to celebrate a 3-year anniversary.
We're in our third year in e-commerce years. You know, that could be a century of change, which is awesome. And Clive, you were spot on. I mean, we've kind of morphed what we do to fit whatever a firstmovr initiative needs to be. But we like to call ourselves a satellite center of excellence, kind of orbiting other organizations' centers of excellence, or we can plug in to be one when they don't necessarily have one or as robust a team. And we're here to help with education, change management, on the training, on the advisory side. But really, we go where the opportunity is to help fellow practitioners, but everyone else come over that change curve.
Implicit in that, I would imagine, is, I mean, it's in the name, firstmovr. So there's an incumbency for you guys to be able to look around the corner and understand what's going on there. And I remember when we were in operating roles, it's really hard when you heads down grinding to put your head up and try and get a sense of what's coming down the road and who's doing what. And so one of the benefits, I would imagine, not dissimilar to my history in the agency world, is one of the benefits of being in firstmovr is you get a very broad and deep look across companies. And you can get a good sniff for how they're operating and who's doing good and who's doing bad and who's doing better and where a company's struggling. I'd love to spend whatever it takes, 10, 15 minutes, whatever you want, talking about the two, $64 billion questions, which is, what are people getting right out there as you look across companies? Question number one. And question number two is, what are they getting wrong? And I think there's lessons to be learned in both. So let's start with the positives. What are they getting right? What are you seeing out there that's encouraging? Because clearly the last few years have been a real sort of an accelerator, both in focus and outcomes in the e-commerce space. So who's doing it right and what are they doing right?
Oskar, why don't you start?
So I think, a few things have changed, right, since COVID. Number one is, I think everybody kind of understands that, e-commerce, digital commerce, whatever you want to call it, is here to stay. So people get this, despite that sometimes there is news that, people are going back to retail, when it comes into that. So I think, there is a little bit of a better engagement with a lot of the executive teams. People understand this is no longer a fad. It's kind of sad that it took us 10 years to get to this point and a major pandemic, right? So I think from that perspective, there's a lot of attention, and it's much easier to galvanize different cross-functional teams around digital commerce, that we need to do something. But I think, where companies struggle a little bit when it comes into, it's like really find the purpose, really kind of understand how much change there is on the horizon. And I'll tell you, Clive, people have no clue what's coming right? We are basically scraping like, the two-dimensional commerce. And, I know at the end we want to talk about metaverse. I know everybody talks about it. It's a fad, but I'll actually can break you down a little bit like how I see the evolution of commerce and content into the future, which will challenge a lot of those kind of notions that this is just a fad. But Chris, from a training perspective, and we do a lot of also kind of talks to national sales meeting, the executive teams. Like, what's your perspective on that?
So to your point, it's what it is. It took this long to get there, and a pandemic kind of jump started everyone's attention on this. Everybody was aware it was something to consider. And as Clive, as I know you experienced too, e-commerce was always equated to like one of the other opportunities. It was like, we got lots of opportunities. You're like, yeah, but I always say like a pallet skirt at Costco is not the same as e-commerce, even though, yes, it might drive some sales in the short term. So what's nice is that everyone is putting resources against e-commerce, both headcount, cross-functional roles, a strategy. It's in the executive and the broader business unit vernacular now. It's part of the house structures that are shared. I think, and to be fair, there's some companies doing some pretty awesome things. But what's always interesting, and this was always true, but we see 60 to 70 different CPGs up close and personal, and everyone's doing like a chapter of a book. No one has the playbook written out yet, but some of these are relatively intuitive. So it's kind of like company A has chapter 1, 3, and 4, but company B has chapter 1, 7, and 8, but yet everyone's are relatively visible and they're not borrowing. Everyone seems relatively surprised by, oh, wow, I hadn't thought of that. But I realize this is a time for inspiration and action. I think and Oskar kind of going to this as well, and we could talk about this of like ways we can solve for this. I think where it's not that they're getting it wrong, but what would enable it further, and maybe this sounds really overly simple, but yes, I can put resources against something. Yes, I can put a strategy in place. What is it that I'm trying to actually achieve besides growth at a high level? What kind of growth? And then how am I measuring everyone on the ultimate same growth objectives that I'm trying to achieve? Because you are what you measure, and not everyone's actually measured on this space. So thus, only the e-com teams or a few select cross-functional groups actually drive it, because it's not changing my behavior the way it would if it was actually in my performance reviews. Yeah, that kind of thing.
So before we go into the solve, because that's crucial, I'm both stunned and intrigued. So let me talk about stunned. I mean, Oskar, you and I were together with a group of people 17 years ago making a case for e-commerce, right? And we were in an organization that was incredibly well run with tons of great talent. And I remember, but this is 17 years ago, there were some reactions in the organization that says, this is dangerous, this is risky, we're going to really piss off our brick and mortar customers, we don't know if there's going to be a big deal. And, at the time, that was tough to deal with, but we managed through it in part because we had very, very senior executive sponsorship and turned it into a $1 billion+ business. But that was 17 years ago. So I'm stunned that 17 years later, there are still organizations out there, if I'm hearing you correctly, saying, I'm not sure how big this is, and they're equating it in the wrong way to, like, this is a channel, right? This is a massive driver of business and then some. So that's the stunned part, and I just want to make sure that did I hear you correctly? And again, of course, there are outliers. There's extremes that are like full functioning, killing it altogether, and then there's we haven't woken up yet. But I'm talking about the messy middle, which is where it all happens.
So let me address this. Number one is don't age yourself too much, right? It's not 17 years ago. Because really, like KC, when we were together, we really started to get serious once P&G got serious about 2010, 2011. So let's say it's like 11, 12 years, right? So people understand that the digital commerce is here to stay. But if you have like this, why, how, what, we got the why mastered fairly well with one exception. there is still a massive debate about online influence of offline sales. A lot of the retailer teams don't understand that your digital shelf is actually influencing your sales at the store, because people are actually now glued to their cell phones, like they walk like zombies through the checkout aisles. Nobody's paying attention to anything else, and they can actually do a research on anything, right? So even if you have items that are maybe not performing well for digital commerce, right, because of price park architecture, whatever the reason is, most of the times it's price park architecture, you got to ensure that people can see reviews, that they see the right content, that those items are found easily via search. So that online influence of offline sales is still treated as almost like an urban myth, where people want to see the right numbers. And I know we kind of, where we are at KC, we kind of simplified, because we basically said, $1 online will drive $6 in the retail. But even with simplification of that story, there is still a big well, I believe it, but I don't believe it, right? So I think, that there's still a little bit of a challenge there that we need to kind of explain why.
Well, and to your point, what one of the Clive, what we say a lot too in trainings and everything is there's still this I know that if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around to hear it, it did make a sound, but because I didn't hear it,
I'm not sure.
Because I'm not measured on the sound that it made, I don't do anything different about it, right? And so, and to be fair, it's not I can't. I'm not enabled to. I'm not being asked about it. I'm not being asked to go measure it. And the measurement is still, again, we're still in a very data entrepreneurial environment right now, because we don't have the IRI and Nielsen syndicated data giving us that MULO 90% of the market view in the in-store world that we obviously want for the online world. But we're still in that bridge at the moment of trying to put, lasso a tornado that has a lot of wind rolling even around the tornado's outer edges, right? And so there's so much value, even intuitively. And to Oscar's point too, it's not just the shoppers' influence of online to offline, it's the merchants, right? The buyers are looking at digital performance data to determine, on even Amazon when they're in other retailers, looking at that as an indicator of well, who would I want to bring in store, right? Who's a rising star? And I know there's several large major retailers who are starting to ask, well, maybe ask is in quotes, right? Require large CPGs to test their products online first for new innovation. And then if it earns a certain velocity, but you have to know how to win online, then you can earn in store and use all the in-store skills you have.
Transactional learning. But so I get it. It's, again, I'm stunned, but I got to move beyond it. But let's go to the intrigue. The intrigue, you use a great analogy, which is some people have got chapters, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but they don't have the book. Why do you think that's the case? And is that necessarily a bad thing? And let me put it this way. One of the greatest, along a list of massive amount of mistakes I've made in my career, is I tend to sort of try and see the whole picture, and then I engineer this massive complex thing, and Oscar, you'll start smiling, but and then the thing collapses on its own weight. And I learned too late the art of sort of one bite at a time. So I have some sympathy, empathy for a leadership approach that says, let's knock off a chapter at a time, because this thing is this massive. It's massive if you look at it in its totality. So it could be a good thing, but I'm hearing you say they're not seeing the other chapters. Is it a fact of I have a strategic plan that I have the book and I'm knocking off one chapter at a time? Or is it a sort of tactical thing that says, I see a chapter, I can see money there, let's knock that off and we'll worry about the next thing later because this thing's so massive? What's really happening, or is it all of the above?
Well, some of it is, if you think about it, the CPGs, no matter what, have almost like a DNA built into it. It's like a rubber band. When you push it too far, it tries to snap back, right? We know that happens quite a bit. The other thing is, I think, honestly, the number one issue, which, we're going to talk about issues and some of the challenges, are definitely silos. CPGs are built in a very silo way where it's very hard to tell a holistically end-to-end story. And most of the CEOs or most of the C-suite executives, they don't have a way to tell this holistic story that it's compelling, that can win hearts and minds of people. And to be frank, they actually don't see what is potential implications to their business. I mean, I give you like a very simple example, right? One of the biggest challenges that we have right now in digital commerce is that everybody's running their own special days. Like, Amazon's going to have a Prime Day, in the next 2 days, 11 and the 12th. But what's going to happen is that Walmart's going to match probably some of the pricing. Will Best Buy do it? Target probably will do it, etc. Right? So suddenly, like, everybody's promoting. But the way we are actually managing those customers are still massively in a silo. We don't build retail customer plans that are really comprehensive end to end, kind of to understand the dynamics. What's the dynamic of retail versus what's the dynamic of e-commerce, and how to build this holistically together. Some of the revenue growth management teams, they are trying kind of to do this, but they still are not fundamentally able to do this end to end that would actually make sense financially. Like, to be honest, I honestly see this, that we suck at the ROI portion of a lot of our initiatives, right? And we are not able to actually do what we actually were doing very well at KC, war game different paths and get to a decision tree to kind of understand where we need to end up, right? Because CPG fundamentally are very good at managing the street, managing the quarterly reports and cost cutting, right? But we are not actually looking at decision tree of war games, like which decisions we need to take. How do we need to change our behavior?
And Oscar, you're talking about looking at comprehensive retailer plans across a specific retailer, in other words, off an online retail plan for a specific retailer, or across all retailers, so you understand where the pressures are and how to manage mix within and across.
I honestly think it's all retailers, all channels.
Yeah.
Like, even specialty in a situation of e-commerce can cause you a lot of problems within your retail channels, just because of what e-commerce has done is, and digital commerce, it just made any product accessible, any information accessible, any pricing fairly accessible, which that just exposes very bad kind of management of price park architecture, very bad of shopper marketing, right? And we see a lot of companies are now realizing is that the shopper marketing team should be managing retail and digital commerce end to end, and work very closely with the design team.
Right. Good. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, you mentioned the point. This is kind of an interesting reality, is in the brick and mortar world, still present today and still present in the minds of a lot of people who grew up in this space. Not that it's mature anymore because of the influence of all that space, but we had I don't give everyone credit, but most CPGs have the playbook for brick and mortar, right? We've gotten really good at it decade after decade. There was a box and some constraints, and there were some innovations outside of it. Got really good, and so it became relatively mature in terms of the levers you would pull and the what's outside the box and next level. And so people knew how to do that. And then, but now you get into e-com, and even 10 plus years in, to real CPG focus on this space, even before the pandemic. And it's almost like, because there's so much foundational, like, blocking and tackling and tactics, like, we're almost just excited just to have gotten, like, well, I got my content optimized. And you're like, well, you're not done. You're going to have to do that again in like a quarter or maybe ongoing. And you got your content optimized for overall conversion, right, and retail readiness, but you didn't choose a specific growth objective like you might have in store. You might have designed your whole strategy at a Walmart around repeat, or around bringing lapsed people back in, or driving all net new trial into the category and the brand. Whereas online, it's like nobody's chosen one of those, again, like the households versus dollars per trips versus trips per household type strategies. So we're almost in this weird, like, we lost our maturity as we moved into an immature space or an adolescent space.
Right.
And then right now, going back to we're writing the playbook again. So it's not that you should do all 20 chapters of the playbook on day one, or that you'll ever be like again, Mondelez or Kimberly-Clark or Kellogg's will be the best at every strategy. But it's almost like everyone's a little bit afraid of the fact that they don't even know that there are other chapters to go look at. And we haven't been asked to go be that innovative or enabled to. So there's just a lot of that going on in this space.
But
So,
there's no, that makes sense. But there is a different perspective to take, because I've sort of steered us into naturally into a sort of why the hell aren't we doing more? There's another perspective to take, which comes out of your maturity comment, which you could take a perspective that says this is excellent. Like in the scheme of things, you've got an offline channel that's decades, more than, I mean, it's a ridiculous level of maturity, and it's done. And we're an infant. We're not even an adolescent, frankly. And so you could take a perspective that says success, incredible amount of innovation, incredible amount of progress. It doesn't change the point that says, and there's a lot more to be had. The thing for me is, and it's probably par for the course, is, look at it. Lots of money being driven to the channel, lots of talent moving into organizations, more and more focus at a C-level, and lots of really interesting companies in the space. Our dear friend Sarah Profitera, and there's a lot of terrific innovation and companies in the space. So you could say that this is fantastic. There's a really positive story to tell, and there's a great opportunity to get more mature, more disciplined, more organized, less frantic, and more connected to move us forward.
100%. Yeah, no, there's a very positive story here. We just, I think, as you said at the beginning, we're never satiated here.
Right.
Because
which is good. You need the angry people.
First loser very quickly.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, the one of the things I always talk with my physical trainer, and basically it's a little bit like this. We've been weightlifting all our lives, and now we're supposed to do cardio, and we just have the wrong behaviors and embedded in our kind of a psyche that we wanted, that our basically nature is going a little bit off, against what we really need to do, right? Because part of the challenge with online digital commerce is that number one is everything becomes more nuanced over time. So we have to have incredible learning agility to be able to understand how in detail we got to get, how ingrained we got to get. And I give an example. It's it used to be, hey, you would manage product availability. Now you got to manage product availability on a zip code level, right? You could do a lot of search analysis, but now everybody's doing, day parting, right? So with content, you have this massive issue where content, basically, it's almost a never-ending story, because retailers keep on changing their strategies. They're trying to one-up of each other. So you literally have it's almost impossible to do KPIs quarter over quarter, because the whole environment is changing, right? So as long as we kind of accept, and the brands accept that this is never-ending journey, right? What we are doing is we are building a new muscle. It's critical. But the other thing is that nobody actually really talks about it, is that if you actually look at capability across the organizations, they are not constantly going up. People forget how much churn we have within large CPGs. And capability of any CPG can go up and down. And a lot of the times they are basically relearning something they already learned 5-6 years ago. And because of the regime change, they have to kind of learn the same lessons, right? So this road is not necessarily a straight road. It's very windy.
I get it. And I was talking to someone recently, and they talked about a regime change that resulted in literally wiping out, 7 and 8 years of work in progress. So if you go back to the point, and then I do want to get into the metaverse in a moment, but things, instead of sort of, instead of sort of saying you suck and you're horrible and yelling at people, which is not the intention, right? What are the top 5 things you'd advise a C team to work on? I'm hearing things like connectivity. Let me start. I'm hearing things talk about a comprehensive destination so people can see the whole picture, and then talk about the lily pads that you need to jump to get there, right? That's 1. 2, talk about breaking down silos. in however you do it, and every company has a different way of doing it. Talk about sustaining capability build and not being sort of a victim to the pendulum swing because that hurts you, irrespective of how you reorg or restructure over time. But how do you ensure sustain? What are the other things, and are those correct things that, as we go in constructively into an organization, go, well done. You know, you've jumped in the water and you're swimming. Now we're going to learn strokes, and then we're going to form teams, and then we're going to set up lanes, and then we're going to have a swim meet, and then we're going to go to the Olympics. Like, how do we walk that path?
And Oskar, I'd love for you to build on this because I know you're working on a couple projects specifically that focus on these change levers. But what we've tried to do, because a lot of times change is even a story that seems a little bit fluffy to executives, and they've heard enough. Like, we know we need to change because we've been running the business for a long time, and there's been a lot of change, but there's no like practitioner's approach to change outside of like, and I'm not knocking like the big four consulting firms, but there's some like theoretical ones that are implemented, but not ones that are easy for the practitioner leader to implement. So we actually earlier this year, we put out a little, I'd say a playbook of thought leadership, but it was really about an actionable 8-step kind of arguably scorecard of sorts, even though it could be subjective or qualitative in how you would score, but with 8 levers you would pull to drive change. And because the executives may need to understand how e-commerce works, but they don't go do it, they enable the team to do it. And the cool thing is, just like we didn't name our company e-commerce because we knew first mover needed to be whatever the next thing is, we said, this 8 steps of change could be for anything, right? The metaverse, e-commerce, whatever comes after that. Neuralink, as Oskar was educating me on my future in the Matrix, which is exciting. But honestly, you named some of them, but like what we kind of call that was, it's executive commitment to a change publicly and internally. It's an achievable vision, but like I know where we're going to end up. We're not just committed to doing it. We're going to end up somewhere. A focused strategy and what we'd say smart goals or smart objectives, knowing what kind of growth levers are going to get there. The right resources and investment, communication and assessment, back to that transparency and connectivity, education and upskilling. I know none of these sound crazy, but they're important. Organizational enablement is the shifting of the metrics, which comes from communication and assessment. But just because you send out a scorecard to everybody doesn't mean that Oskar is now measured on a different behavior and won't be promoted or advanced himself in his life and career and internally without it. And then and then I'm missing the focus leadership, right? Which is that there will always need to be a separate team in the short term tasked with a change, even though over time you very quickly want to integrate that back in with the right metrics so that it's not another silo working on the future. It's everybody. So that we have those kind of 8 levers that we recommend scoring. We have kind of a scorecard we even use and we've done with some companies just to help the executives and the practitioners even rate themselves and start identifying what is it that's not committed enough or what's not resourced enough, that kind of thing.
Makes total sense. Oskar, were you going to say something? Because I was going to move us on, but if you have something on this topic.
Yeah, no, I would say it's like, for me, really, we got to drive the right behavior. And especially learning agility at the moment is basically absolutely critical, right? Think about this, what's happening. For example, with AI, imagery, like with Stable Diffusion, where AI is basically building out entire pieces of work, right? And in a way, what I've been advocating is like the blueprint of the path of technology is written. We know where it's going to go. And we know even algorithms, require 3 things. Number one is somebody has to explain the entire organization what is this AI algorithm is doing, right? Then we need to add the training data to it to make the algorithm better. And then we got to sustain the algorithm, right? So we need to figure out it's like how it's going to fit in within our ecosystem. So like, that's why we have this mantra of explain, train, and sustain, because even in a highly technological future, it's going to be necessary. So we got to get better at learning agility. We got to get better at storytelling, which, you as a master storyteller, Clive, you know that yourself is like, any revolution has to be televised and very well explained because you can always, get the defeat turned into a win. But I think fundamentally what needs to happen with all of it is the future is more or less known which direction is it going. We just have to figure out is like, how do we get more technologically infused? Because to be honest, like some of the concepts that I use in technology, for example, like Dockers, etc., they can be applied to large organizations, but fundamentally they will have to change how they are actually operating. Much more in silos, not in silos, much more task orientated versus like broader vision, less meetings, more orchestration, like, so I think it's going to change like the way we actually operating in the future, because it would be humans working in hand with AI for a better outcome. But we need to kind of really tell the organization which direction we're going. And it's almost like when we're going to be talking about the future, it's almost what movie are we watching?
Right.
Are we at Ready Player One stage or are we at Matrix stage, right? Because there's a massive difference.
But that's a perfect segue. It's like I want to talk about the metaverse because I get massively amused, particularly on LinkedIn, where you see someone post something and go, "This is the future," and then someone makes a comment going, "This is the biggest joke in the world," and there's a lot of emotions and anger. But take the metaverse, take AI, take machine learning. You hear these terms that get flung around as like the greatest thing, and it's going to change the world, and then you see what I'd say random acts of AI, random acts of machine learning, random acts of the metaverse and 3.0, and in you get very sort of polarizing responses to them. I wonder if the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? So I'd love to hear your point of view on the metaverse. Is it real? Is it bullshit? Is it a vanity project for our friend Zach? Or everything and all between?
So it's not a vanity project. And I give an example. So myself, I grew up in Poland. I don't want to age myself, but it was like when I was a kid, it was the end of communism. And everything what we could do is like watch two channels which had massive propaganda on, or read science fiction books, right? So my formative year as a little kid was reading science fiction codes, right? So like,
hang on, before you just explained everything for me about you. Sidebar. All right, but, we understand.
Yeah, but anyway, so think about it is, for me, there is no escaping the future, right? My entire existence, it's all about, can I bring the future one step closer? What can I do? That's why I always jump into things like, digital commerce. But if you think about it, is fundamentally what we are doing is we are basically on this path of changing consumer experiences and changing their expectation. And I give you like a really stupid immigrant point of view, but it would be very easy to understand. In 2000, when I was flying back home and I was like 20 miles away from Polish border, basically a taxi driver would turn on the radio and I could hear Polish news. So I basically knew I was 20 miles from the border because the radio station, was actually getting the signal. So in that 2000, my entire dream was to actually get Polish radio, me driving in Atlanta, so I can just listen to the news, right? And it happened because, even happened prior to iPhone using like Motorola Q. So my next step was, it's like, I would love to watch games, right? I would love to see, live soccer games. And, it took another 10 years. It took, fiber internet, the advances of VPNs, because, broadcast laws are very outdated, unfortunately, right? So like, things like WireGuard, etc. But, I basically use the same equipment that I would use back home, because now everything is broadcast through the internet. You actually don't need satellite, don't need cable. Everything is fiber, everything is information, right? So my next step is like, I would love to sit with my cousin, and be at the game and feel like I'm sitting at the game. He would be physically there, but I would be next to him virtually, but he could see me and I could see him and we could have the same experiences, right? So that dream of the metaverse is doable. We just need a little bit better hardware. We actually getting to a better, fast enough internets with lower enough latency to actually be able to create those new emotional experiences for people, that they could actually elevate their life, and eliminate, the distances between each other, right? To have something silly like a game night with your relatives around the globe, have a conversation on just shooting the shit. Yes, you can do it via Zoom, but it's not the same as like feeling like you actually there. So I think from emotional point of view, there is big case for metaverse that it's actually doable, right? That it should be done. Just this is kind of like our nature to drive the technological progress. But I think where it gets interesting is that if you think about it, these interfaces, I see this in like 5 different stages. So at the moment, we basically master the 2D commerce. It's basically a screen, it's laptop, desktop, etc., cell phone, two-dimensional screen. The second step is, can we use the AI to help us to build new imagery, like new product imagery? So let's say what we want to do is we want to do imagery for different customers. So maybe we build the AI that can actually change PDP pages and product imagery pages and adapt it to Kroger, to Walmart, to etc., right? So you basically have this like massive adoption automatically. But the thing what it is the limitation is humans and AI can actually still make the wrong mistake, no matter what. We are not very well yet at saying that AI output's going to be 100% there. That's what I think. What is going to happen is there's going to be like humans working with AI to help to feed the algorithm and adjust the algorithm, right? So the next step, what I think is doable, it's a combination of VR/AR. So we know like even this in October, we're going to have 3-4 headsets coming out. Some of them are tethered. Sony PlayStation is working. ByteDance is working on Pico. We know Zach is invested in it. The challenge with those headsets is they are very heavy. They are not necessarily powerful enough to do a total immersion, but we're getting there. Because if you can take the latest headset and do, for example, foveated rendering, which basically means is where you're actually looking, it's rendered 100%, but anything on the outskirt is just rendered 50%, to save computing power. And whatever you move your eyes, it just basically follows you. You can actually create those kind of much more immersive experiences. And we need that AI to help us to build it because it's humanly impossible. So think about it this. At the moment with stable diffusion, we can only render imagery. But soon those imagery will turn into movies, that AI can render movies and create movies. And soon AI can create 3D experiences, which we need, more computing power, but we're getting there, every year closer and closer, right? So in that kind of a situation is we can create a virtual reality that is completely different. So maybe people will no longer go to concerts. Maybe they would actually use AI the same way as they are using cell phones, right? To actually go to the concert, for example, etc. So that's that step. But we also know, and this is kind of what I call it, player. What is this? Ready One Player. Spielberg movie. But we can even with the Neuralink, think about it. We can actually tap into human brain potentially down the line, 20, 30 years, where you don't have to render anything. You just basically create, in your head, imagery, experience, and you can get into senses, smells, etc. It could be basically a full immersion. And now we are in the Matrix, and that is completely different game change. Because if we are right now, if the digital content at the moment maybe matters 5 to 10%, maybe in AR, VR, it matters 50%, right, versus the real world. In a Neuralink type of a scenario, that opens up a lot of opportunities, a lot of problems, but that's going to be 100%. Right. So that digital content is going to be absolutely critical there, where we're going to have entire C-suite of people devoted only to content, and we completely would change the paradigm and change the experience in what's possible, right? And that's what I see, that what even Zach is talking about today, it's not even close enough what it could be. And people don't realize is that they basically got to take their movies and stack them together, right? In terms of in the right order, and see how far they want to go. And I'm sure like any technology will have resistance. Cars have resistance, internet had resistance, any technology will always have resistance.
Well, I also I think there's 2 thoughts about it, and then we'll start closing that, because we over time, as I expected. Whenever you open a topic of this, it's hard to close. But I think you got to be really clear the difference. We started talking about here and now, tangibility, scale business in digitally enabled commerce. And I think people tend to talk at the same level of enthusiasm and nowness when we get into metaverse and go like, it's here and it's now and it's going to be scaled. It's not. I think these are two very, very. One is about sort of breakthrough innovation that belongs in a smaller place, in a distinct place, not smaller, a distinct place where you're dabbling and you're looking at possibilities. And the peril is not to get in the water and experience it and understand and learn it, but it's not going to yield scale return in the here and now versus the mainstream center plate digital commerce. So I think that tends to cause confusion. The second one is an era of enthusiasm, which is people who are on the forefront of it can see, like you just went through, the possibilities of what it could be and have a leap of faith because it's been successful in the past, that you can believe we can get there, and your enthusiasm has a negative response to people who can't see it. So I think there's a part of the problem is just how you frame and talk about it and where you place the conversation that's causing some, and then there's some inherent cynicism relative to Meta and the company. And then you
get so
Oskar, I was just going to say, I always start with like, again, there's like 50,000 futures, obviously alternate dimensions, but like people, the doubters of e-commerce, even when that felt closer to reality because it was literally already happening in pockets and channels, it was the path of least resistance towards maybe a lower base level of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs of how fast I can get stuff, right? My survival and then my base levels of the Maslow hierarchy of need can be achieved by the things I can get before the connectivity and the self-attainment that I would get. But why, if you haven't watched that Ready Player One movie, it is a great depiction of where this could go, because there are people of all levels of income and achievement and experience in this oasis experience, this metaverse, living out the life that they wouldn't have been able to live out. They would have lived out a different version of it, but in the real world, right? They were living it in this metaverse, and it goes their ability, before we even get into Oskar's awesome vision of where it goes, where like you're creating the future and writing your own world. You're living in a world that was created for you, but the options are somewhat endless. This is the path of least resistance. This is where things go. People will always seek purpose, whether they have everything or have nothing. And so it'll be different depending on the people. So I have no doubt the why is going to drive us that way. And one other thing I was just going to add to that, because this is kind of like the e-com is somewhat prevalent across the market. But when we think of quick commerce, right, you can't get GoPuff or Gorillas or Getter or, like 15-minute commerce everywhere yet. So when brands are trying to activate against that, it's in pockets. It feels like a big opportunity, but it's not fully infrastructurally scaled yet to be. So it is very segmented groups and missions that you're going after. Today, that's where the metaverse is a lot of flashes of like, Walmart did something in Roblox as a game, and like now we have a store experience in the game. Okay, great. And test that, learn from that, know that it's a small group, but it's showing that you're building the chops. Now, when the infrastructure and the platforms all come together and I can have a more, maybe it's 3 or 4 platforms, but eventually it'll be the interwebs 7.0 or whatever is where it all links together in some form or fashion. Now it starts becoming more scaled and I can buy from any retailer or any brand, if that's part of my experience in any realm, somewhat seamlessly. So right now the piping isn't behind it to make, just like quick commerce isn't scaled across all rural, suburban, and metro geographies yet, but we're starting to get towards that. So we're in like waves of, as people know. Yeah.
But I would really quickly frame it for you. So I'll give you an example. NFTs right now, it's like video game crash of 1983. It's literally the same kind of a phenomena, right? AI generated imagery, it's Amazon starting in 95, 96. This is where we end. Metaverse, we are probably Amazon maybe 98, 99 is still selling books and DVDs. Yes, we are early days, but the question is at what point we are jumping on the bandwagon when it's too late.
Yep.
You know, it's very hard to catch the right moment, when do you need to jump on that wave to make sure that you actually profit from that wave, right? And that's the danger of it, is that it's very easy to miscalculate it, because to be honest, I don't think for things like metaverse is going to take, years. It might take 5 years, might take 6 years, 7 years. It really depends. A lot of it is going to be, maybe the metaverse, what we are building should be more first AR focused versus VR. Maybe VR it's basically, too far, too many bridges too far. So that having that kind of a foresight to jump onto it at the right time, it's also critical. But to be honest, I think a lot of the different brands will do exactly what we did at KC. We jumped into e-commerce not because we believed it, it's P&G forced us to do it. Because P&G started to create epochs, started to be very serious about it, and somebody did the first step and everybody else had to follow. We didn't have a choice.
Huh.
Right.
Well, I'd say we're going to have to cut it now, but this is a topic for another follow-up thing. I'd say as it relates to the metaverse, like everything else, oversell it at your peril, ignore it at your peril. Okay, and the answer is being smart about how to get in and when it in. Meantime, as it relates to digitally enabled, data-enabled commerce, massive progress, well done, much, much more to be done, and a substantial amount of revenue and, importantly, accretive profitability is on the table that you leave in there. And I think that's the big message, at least from my perspective. Chris and Oskar, I know you got to go and do a session with some clients about Cyber Monday. I appreciate you guys taking the time. Always fun talking to you. We'll have to have a second session on the metaverse and all the other things happening. And I shudder to say this in Oscar's head. But anyway, great to see you guys. Great to chat. Thank you so much for making the time.
All right. Take care. Appreciate it. Clive.
Thank you. Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.